Welcome to Evilive, the live media commentary show that answers the question, if the devil's always lying to you, is he actually just using reverse psychology to get you to do God's will? Inquiring minds want to know. All right, well, subscribe to this if you're new to the channel, because today we are reviewing Clive Barker's A to Z of horror, compiled by Stephen Jones. Now, if you're in the UK, you probably know who Stephen Jones is. And if you're not, like me, it doesn't matter. It's just a dude. All right, so this was compiled from the BBC television miniseries by Stephen Jones, and it's one of those books. Let me throw it up on screen here. It's one of those books that's very much like the, these are the different films that influenced me as a writer. So Clive Barker is presenting all of his influences in this sort of A to Z format, and all of his horror influences come from, the early performers from as early as like the 20s all the way through to the 80s, and it sort of informed how he became the writer, the artist, the comic, I wouldn't say aficionado, but certainly fan that he actively is. And I'm one of those people who, if it has Clive Barker's name on it, I'm going to buy it. So whether that's a book, a comic, a movie, any of his IPs, I am a huge fan. Even like the kids stuff, like Abrat and the Thief of Always. I absolutely love it. I think he has a vivid imagination. His way of spinning, of developing a world and weaving a narrative story filled with mystery and magic, ancient knowledges, and it's just it pulls from H.P. Lovecraft. It pulls from some of the greatest performers. I mean, as a young man, he was obsessed with comics. And so it sort of presents that. So that whole A to Z is broken out into categories. So, someone coming into this might be thinking that they're referencing A to Z of horror, like specific horror films. And that's not entirely accurate. So, for example, A is for American Psycho. Not the film or the book, but Ed Gein, the serial killer, because so many great horror movies and books were made based off of Ed Gein, the serial killer, as a sort of foundation. And then off of that spiraled a bunch of stuff that would go on to influence Clive Barker later on in his life. The Exorcist, of course, starting with the novel, and then, of course, the film, played massive influences in how Clive Barker saw cinema. How he saw narrative storytelling with religious themes. And you can actually see a lot of the influences coming over into some of his other work, where he creates his own religious organizations, like in the Aberrat or Imagica. And you really get a sense, a scope of this broad worldview that Clive Barker came out of. And it's not always just straight film or comics or actors or serious real life murderers. I mean, some of it is from performance art. And I'm trying to remember which one it was in, which category, if it was like in pain. I think it was in Pain. But there's an entire section devoted to this French theater scene that was happening at the turn of the century that ended up, basically it was just plays of torture and mutilations. It was all fake, but it was very, very popular in France at the time. And you can really see those influences coming out in Clive Barker's work. His books of blood are filled with torturous scenes and sexual mutilations. And, Clive Barker is a very sexual writer. And so it's really nice to see where that comes from in part. If you do, in fact, enjoy that type of work, which I definitely do. Part of the sections were very underdeveloped, which is a bit of a criticism on my part for this book. And it's not all in Clive Barker's voice, because, again, it was compiled by Stephen Jones. And so some of the sections Clive Barker sort of takes over to explain Hellraiser and Candyman and, stuff like that. But mainly it's other people talking about these subjects devoid of Clive Barker entirely, which really makes the book fall flat if you bought it like I did for Clive Barker being a part of it. And like a namesake. I mean, his face is on the damn cover for for fuck's sake. So it's not all great, you know. And here's the other thing: this came out in '97. I was already a horror fan for a long time, but I wasn't an educated horror fan. I didn't know about the deep lore and history of horror films, the genre, and how it developed. Now, as a grown man, 20 years later, I definitely understand all of that and the import of it. What this book does, and if I would have read it when I bought it in '97, it would have informed me about all of that. But now, being so far removed from it and then returning to the book finally reading it, I have a bookshelf full of books that I picked up intending to read but never got around to, even though I read a book a week, for years. It's just, I just have too many books to get to. Um, but ultimately, going back to it now and reading it, it's stuff that I already know. And so it's nice to sort of revisit these ideas about the genesis of the ghoul into the zombie from Romero's film Night of the Living Dead, or grim fairy tales being a massive influence on storytelling and general fairy tale structure that Clive Barker would then take and carry forward. These ideas of just pain and the corruption of innocence that played into various tales and plays and even filmmaking that Clive Barker was involved in. It's nice to see those influences, but again, because I'm at a point in my life where I already know this stuff, I've already found it out from various other documentaries or different artists sharing their love for this genre. I was a little underwhelmed. And so again, I'm going to return to that one section called Rictus. R is for Rictus. And it was like 2 pages. And it was just one of the pages was just like, an image of a mask that was like a face, but it was just sort of a contorted, weird looking face. And he's saying that this influenced him in some way, but he didn't really elaborate at all on it. And it really felt like, oh, we need something for R. What are we going to do for R? Or someone's like, I don't know, Rictus? They're like, all right, let's just throw something together really quick and move on. Since I never watched the original BBC series of this, I can only take it on face value of what the book is presenting, and it was very hollow, and it was very sort of devoid of any substance in that section. But again, for an entire alphabet worth of content, one letter is not going to be, a big deal. And if you're unfamiliar with Clive Barker's inspirations, with the horror genre, and not just film, not just written literature, but comics, real life plays and performers, and just the history of the industry. Well, then this is going to give you a lot if you aren't sort of informed on any of that stuff. And I really appreciate it for that aspect of it, as sort of a historical record from one person's perspective of influences. This is an interesting read, and it's very quick. It's under 300 pages, and so you just sort of fly by. It throws in quotes on the pages. They're sort of like collages on the page of different film posters or photos of individual people or actors, and then it'll have like little pull quotes along the edges of nearly every page, giving sort of, if it's not a direct quote from like Ed Gein, maybe it's something from Vincent Price. You just have a bunch of little quotes from different artists and creators, directors of horror. You've got performers, actors, and that's great. Getting to, again, it's all pull quotes, so it's all taken out of context. So you have to kind of build the context through the narrative of what you're actively reading in that section in order to really understand what some of these pull quotes are referring to. But it's still nice to see them all. So ultimately, just sitting down for a little bit for 2 days to finish this book, it took me back to where I was in the 90s when I picked it up. It sort of set me down this path of revisiting Clive Barker's inspirations and recalling and sort of reflecting on how they also inspired me, not just through Clive Barker's work, but individually, because I was exposed to nearly all of the influences that influenced him separate from him in my own life. And so it's nice to see how these different actors, these different films, these different genres influenced both of us. And to see the trajectory that his career took, which is just fantastic, and the results of his writing based on those influences, it's pretty inspiring, and it's I don't know, it's pretty great. So this is going to be a short one, but just to say, it's not all roses, it's not all great, and it doesn't really tell you a whole lot about the inner workings of Clive Barker's mind. And I'll have to see the miniseries in order to get a really full picture of this. And so, I'm going to put that on my little bucket list there. But if you want to find out who influenced Clive Barker and how he got to where he is, this is a pretty decent collection. Ultimately, I gave it 4 evil eyes out of 5 evil eyes because some of it did ring a little hollow, and I was already informed about a lot of this stuff. So it just didn't really resonate with me as much as it would have if I would have read it back in the day. But if you, again, are uninformed, pick it up, check it out. I think you're going to really enjoy it. Ultimately, throughout the alphabet of influences of Clive Barker, it's worth reading, especially, being under 300 pages. Just, plow through it and enjoy. And of course, it does also have a bunch of resources so you can find out, get a list of like films that you can read or books that you can read to also sort of catch up in the bibliography and stuff. But anyway, that is going to do it for this review. Good book, nice collection, not the greatest, but definitely check it out if you like Clive Barker. Thank you all so much for tuning in, and as always, like it or not, evil spelled backwards is live, so get your asses out there and live by being evil. Yeah. Like the fruits of the devil.